Hello, everyone, and welcome to another segment of Lore You Should Know. That is where we delve into little bits of Dungeons and Dragons to find out what's going on in their tidbits. And I haven't done this intro in a while, and I totally screwed it up.
That's
And maybe
that's a thing.
It's the different seats.
We did switch seats, and now you're off your game.
Yeah, and then I was literally being like, "Oh, this is like riding a bike. I know how to say this thing," and then it just didn't pop in
And then
there.
boards.
So hi, people on the Twitch. We're going to take that as a take two. You ready? We're going to do a take two on this one.
Hold on.
All right.
Hold the phone.
Holding the phone. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another segment of Lore You Should Know. That is where we delve into little bits of Dungeons and Dragons lore for your own edification or just to use in your game or just for funs. I am Greg Tito, and I am joined by...
Chris Perkins.
How are you today?
Pretty good.
It has been a little while since we've recorded one of these.
It's true. Yes.
Today, though, is a very special day because we get to talk about Acquisitions Incorporated and the lore contained therein.
Something which miraculously or surprisingly we've never really talked about in the show before.
We really haven't.
Considering we've been involved with it for 10 years.
Yeah, we've done interviews and things on it, but never about the story and the lore and the background of each of the characters.
And we do get questions still about people, what is this Acquisitions Inc. thing you speak of?
Right, exactly. And we have a book that is out now. You can get it everywhere. Acquisitions Incorporated, the source book with tons of this lore and information in it. And we're going to highlight some of that here.
Absolutely. So for those who don't know, Acquisitions Inc. started as a podcast nigh on 10 years ago.
Yes.
Actually, a short series of podcasts that were meant to promote Keep on the Shadowfell, the first adventure release for 4th edition.
Right. So this was in 2008?
Yeah. And so we were walking. And on another note, it was also designed to get Mike Krahulik into D&D gaming because he had previously resisted efforts to play D&D, but Jerry finally coaxed him into sitting down for a game.
And Mike and Jerry are the two artists behind Penny Arcade, a long video game-themed webcomic that had been around for 8 or 10 years before that.
Yes.
And famously, Jerry, who goes by Tycho in the comic, was a D&D fan and an aficionado, whereas Gabe, who is the alter ego of Mike Krahulik, was not.
Yeah, he was a total TRPG neophyte.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so this podcast was the first time Mike played. Is that right?
That's correct.
Wow.
And his first roll was a natural 20. And
so he was in for life.
He was in for life. That was an easy one. Easy sell for him.
Hook, line, and sinker.
And they also brought in their friend Scott Kurtz to play a character who was originally going to be called, I want to say, Chet. No. Scott Kurtz's proposition for Mike was having trouble naming his character, and so his character was going to be named Chet. It was only a last-minute change. Mike decided to call him Jim instead.
Totally different vibe.
Yeah. Chet Awesome Laser, I believe, was going to be his name. Instead, we got Jim Dark Magic of the New Hampshire Dark Magics. Even though there's no New Hampshire in 4th edition, I let that one slide.
It's an in-joke for anybody.
Correct.
Yes.
So and then the podcast was so popular that eventually we stepped up our game and it became a video. We had a video component added. Then we started to do the live shows, which of course ballooned into the grand spectacles that we see at PAX West and elsewhere.
Right. Did you do the first one? Was that Gen Con? Was that where the first one took place?
I don't remember.
At the live, with a live audience?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we had like card tables that we were playing on a cheap stage. And
right.
Yeah.
It was before it got the pomp and circumstance that it now enjoys with Jeremy Crawford as the Dungeon Master.
Exactly. But we didn't know back then what the reception would be, or even that D&D was something that people wanted to watch instead of play.
Right.
It was not intuitive to me that people would want that this would be a spectator event, and I was delightfully proven wrong.
Yes, people seem to enjoy it.
And now look where that's gone.
Right. Exactly.
Absolutely nowhere. Now you can watch D&D 24/7.
Exactly.
Thank you, Ekink. So anyway, it started off in the 4th edition campaign setting, which was this kind of non-campaign setting, a generic land called Narath, the time of the Dawn War. And it was really built off of the bones of Keep on the Shadowfell and Thunderspire Labyrinth and the other 4th edition adventures of that time. And then 4th edition wrapped up and we were beginning work on 5th edition, and the decision was made to make FR one of the prominent settings of 5th edition and to migrate Acquisitions Inc. from the world that they were in to the Forgotten Realms, which led to the story of the characters traveling between worlds in the Dark Magic Mansion, where for the first time we got to see extended members of the family of the characters, the Dark Magic, New Hampshire Dark Magics. Several members appeared in that story. And since then, other family members of other characters have cropped up in other stories, like Omen's sisters, VREs parents, and so on and so forth.
Right. So was that a planned transition, going from the setting of 4th edition into Forgotten Realms, and then using the Dark Magic Mansion as the connective tissue?
It was planned insofar as people wanted that to happen, and so we narratively jumped through whatever hoops were necessary to get them from this place to that place. It created some interesting retcons is probably too extreme a word, but we had to do things like, okay, well, Jerry was a cleric of Arathis,
right,
in the old world. Now he's a cleric of Timora, which we basically say Arathis and Timora are the same. There's different names, different worlds.
Right.
But
it does kind of continue the multiverse idea that D&D is in multiple different storylines.
But we had to reconcile all this. Like, we had to have conversations offline about, Jerry would come to me and say, okay, well, is Arathis in the Forgotten Realms? I would go, well, no. And then, well, which one is the closest to Arathis's portfolio?
Yeah.
And we went down the list and found Timora is really favorable toward adventurers and luck, and that seemed to tie in nicely with what Jerry envisioned his character getting behind. So, and other decisions had to be made like that as well. Like, for instance, I don't know if it ever came up in play, but we talked about Scott Kurtz's dwarf character, that his clan actually crosses worlds, that they've got representatives on different worlds, and so he could find clan members on Forgotten Realms just as easily as back in Nareth.
There'd be bronze bottoms everywhere.
Exactly. It's just that prevalent. And bronze bottom ale you'll be able to get across the multiverse.
Right, which makes sense. There's also, the idea of this corporate satirical take on it that I think grew over time, right? That was not necessarily there from the get-go.
No, it wasn't. I think Jerry coined the term Acquisitions Inc. pretty early on, but at the early stages it was just a kind of a joke.
Yeah.
And then it became the grounding for the party and the mentality under which the party sort of operates, which is hyper acquisition, treasure grabbing, corporate bureaucracy headed by this one character, and everybody else is kind of subservient to the structure of what Omen has in mind for his corporation. But that was an interesting take. I think that the reason why it gravitated so much with people was it plays to one of the corniest aspects of D&D, which is just the Monty Hall hoarding instinct, the treasure hunt.
Right, so they end up having these large money bins worth of
but
treasure.
It's so ripe for comedy because many of us have been in corporate environments. We know how absurd sometimes that can seem, and you can amplify that in a D&D campaign really well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it also keyed into the idea of kind of franchising out, and there being like several different, organizations that would be in
When Jerry saw the potential of, oh my God, you could have multiple AC Inc. parties because they're all, franchised, that added even more humor, and also just created the sense that you could run your own AC Inc. games at home and be considered part of the canon because you are just a franchise.
Right. Has there been anything like, because you can almost say that AC Inc. is a mini setting or flavor within Forgotten Realms, which is also within
right, and we've legitimized it in a number of places. Like one of Ed Greenwood's novels mentions the character of Omen Drawn.
Yeah.
So that's sort of embedded now in the lore.
Right.
Is there anything else like it?
Yeah, because it seems like it's a subset of a subset of a subset.
It's a weird case where, this happens in D&D all the time, where something that is created autonomously by a fan gets insinuated into the greater game somehow.
Right.
And that can happen in one of several ways. You create a new monster for a monster manual or whatever, and it becomes this transcendent thing that takes on a life of its own. But not in the sense of, here is a party, and that party is now a brand, sort of, that you can, or a faction that you can now insert and play with. in various things. I don't think we'd ever seen that before.
And to your point from earlier, how the entire entertainment or D&D as entertainment thing began with, or was popularized the most by Actions Incorporated. You've seen that happen with Critical Role naming of their groups, with every kind of group that has out there. Like this is our brand for our party, which
Yes.
may not have been as prevalent before then.
Correct. Yeah, certainly it wasn't. If it was prevalent, there was no way of getting it out there to the masses like you can now.
Right. What about the comedy? Because that is something that is very interesting about this specific flavor, right? That you just kind of
Right.
played it up for comedy.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it's a very different style of game from the type of games that we typically run. Like people have seen how Jerry runs his games, and it's very lavish, and but it's not for laughs and chuckles all the time. There's funny stuff that emerges in every D&D game,
Yeah.
so that's natural. But with Acquisitions Inc., because we knew we were, because the guys were just tremendously funny to begin with, we knew we wanted the narrative to take on a goofy slant. Partly because we were a little uncertain how else we would get people to actually watch it. You know,
Right.
if we played it straight, we were afraid that people would want to be in the game. They not want to listen to the game.
Right.
Whereas if it was a comedy routine, people would just get at the very least, they'd get a few laughs out of it
Yeah.
and go, ha ha, ha, that was very light, and move on to some real entertainment.
Yeah, that works.
But it turned out that despite the fact that we deliberately set out to just bring the most funny we can into the show, there were great character developments
Yeah.
happening in that comedy.
Yeah.
And the dynamics between the characters became particularly funny. And when Will Wheaton came on to sort of round out the party,
Yeah.
and you've got some dynamics happening between his character and Scott's character, his character and Jerry's character, and it's all improvised. Everything is improvised. Those relationships still get talked about.
Yeah, and as canon. So yeah,
Yes.
so we mentioned Binwin Bronzebottom, which was Scott Kurtz's character. Will Wheaton's character was AFL.
Yes.
What was their relationship, and how does that?
It was based on this is what happens in a corporate environment where you have to ladder climb to success, and you're both fairly low. There's this competing for the boss's affections or competing for competence angle, and that's sort of the note that Scott and Will hit upon naturally, which is their characters don't like each other because they're kind of vying for the same attentions and spot in the organization, stuff like that. So
Yeah,
they wanted to bring out that kind of cutthroat competition.
which ultimately led to AFL's demise.
Yes. In fact, but we also that's the weird thing about these characters too is because we only had maybe 2, possibly 3 games a year, is you didn't have a lot of contact with the characters most of the time. So every time we sat down to play, the players had to get reacquainted with their characters and how they worked mechanically.
Yeah,
So that's why in live games and stuff, there's a lot of frantic looking at character sheets and not getting things exactly right because they literally haven't seen or played with the character for 6 months.
for a long time.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
But as far as some of the lore and story behind them, so you mentioned the dark magics. What are the New Hampshire dark magics? Can you go through who the scions of that house are?
Honestly, I don't remember all the names. It's been too many. It's been too many years.
And they were mostly all improvised, right?
They were all improvised. I remember a couple of them because they showed up later. Percival and Olivia are
Yes.
cousins, kissing cousins, as it were, because the
Oh.
dark magic family is actually incestuous. And by the way, this came up as a Twitter question, but folks asked how much discussion was there with me and Mike about the nature of the dark magic family for the episode. The answer is none. I did not tell him because my philosophy is you don't get to pick your family. Nobody does. You're just stuck with what you got.
Yeah.
So I wanted to surprise and delight. And I figured Jim's already breaking barriers when it comes to he's this sort of pansexual, he'd screw with a broom in a closet if given a chance. And so his family has similar lack of inhibition when it comes to what they hang out with.
Like
so.
most people I know from New Hampshire.
The New Hampshire hill tribes. Yeah.
Sorry for anyone in New Hampshire. Bad joke.
It is, but so I wanted just to do something for laughs and say that the family is very close.
Yes. That's fascinating.
And of a wizardly bent. All the ones who have meaningful lives in the Dark Magic family have wizardly skills. It sort of runs through the blood, as it were.
Right. And if you're using the NPC stat blocks for Jim, or do any of his family members appear as NPCs in the book?
In the book, no, I don't believe so.
Okay, but you could probably still use
Yeah.
Jim Dark Magic kind of as a template for
Yes.
putting them out there. If you wanted
Yes.
to create new characters in that family vein,
Absolutely.
use tenets like
Yeah.
that. What about the Drawn family? What are
So Jerry sort of built. He actually did some stuff before I got to mess with his family. He had laid some groundwork and said that he had sisters, one of whom he had lost, and that served as a plot device that we used, him trying to find his lost sister.
yeah?
And later it turned out they showed up as Drawn Enterprises, this competing organization bent on the dismantling of Acquisitions, Inc., and only ending up getting practically dismantled itself.
Right.
To set
there's
up some friendly competition.
Yeah, some like corporate
Exactly.
espionage type
Yeah.
level of things.
Exactly. And that was sort of based a little bit on like Disney family members going off and doing their own things or vying for control of parts of the company and things like that.
It's like it's a well-worn kind of thing, but I don't think it had been done in a D&D setting.
No, not really.
Yeah.
And so theirs was all, while Jim's was all about wizards, Omen's was all about corporations and business.
Right. Contracts.
Yes. VREs was all about sort of mystery and lies. That VREs family, we meet them, the Dunstuckers, fairly late in. They're simple pastoral farmer people, basically. VRE is nothing like the family he comes from. He's this showy, flamboyant bard, of course, rogue, with bard-like qualities.
Yes.
But his family are backward, and they live a very low-key, not poverty-stricken, but generally not much demands in terms of life and needs and wants. Very simple life people.
Yeah.
And
they don't feel the call to adventure.
no, not at all. And very down-to-earth, grassrootsy, folksy types.
Almost halfling like
Yes,
without the
exactly.
Yeah.
Who don't understand the adventuring life and don't understand anything like that whatsoever, and there's sort of an embarrassment for him that he sort of ran away from because he felt like they never really amounted to much.
Interesting.
And that if you know that character, you know that he would never be able to abide that sort of existence for long.
Yeah.
But one of the funny jokes that Pat Rothfuss and Jerry always played with is the idea that Viari can't get any upward mobility in the company.
Right, because he's always an intern.
He's always an intern and can't rise to the pinnacle of a Jim,
Yeah.
or a Binwin even.
That's interesting. There's also Morgaine, who's
Yes.
been played by Morgan Webb there.
Yeah. And we had talked a little bit about bringing her in even earlier than she had come in.
Yeah.
Availability being what it was, though, we brought her in at what was a great time. What that did for the chemistry of the group is bring a female voice into what has traditionally been, up to that point, an entire male cast.
Right.
And the dynamic shift was fascinating because Morgan fit in perfectly, but it actually sort of changed the way the boys, as I call them, how their characters behaved,
Right.
in very subtle ways. And I thought that was really interesting because it sort of forces the characters to adapt and change. And of course, she brought in this sort of no nonsense, actions speak louder than words type personality.
Yeah.
That sort of cut through some of the dickering and really added something new to the game.
That's cool. And have we been able to delve into her,
She has remained enigmatic, but has showed up periodically, and she's shown up more recently in Jeremy's game where she pulled a little switcheroo.
Yeah.
I don't want to spoil too much if you haven't
Right,
seen it.
because that's more recent. Yeah, we don't want to necessarily.
I don't wanna
so
spoil
watch
that. Yes.
most recent, I think,
Yes.
if you can.
And then other people have come in to sort of change up the mix. The challenge has always been, for me, is I did not want or need to participate in the selection process of who the fourth player was. But I always enjoyed the challenge of figuring out a way to help integrate them into the game and integrate their characters into the game. But yeah, it's
So as a dungeon master now, having this book and wanting to incorporate some of these things, what would you give for folks? Obviously, if they use these NPCs, we can use some of the stuff we've talked about. But and what the overall tenets are. But what are some ways that you would that people can draw on your expertise as dungeon mastering this group for a long time? What does an Ack Inc. game mean to you, and how can people, even if they're not big fans of the show, want to participate and use this book?
I think that the appeal for me is to, story-wise, to keep the core essence of the game as, remember that it's all about acquisitions. Acquisition is sort of a common theme. The business aspect is a common theme, but you can play with that. Play with some trope, some corporate thing that you've had to deal with. You can integrate that into your game. Take something like a hostile takeover and play with that element, or the corporate spy angle, a rival corporation trying to seed spies into your organization or steal confidential files or paperwork, or there's all kinds of ways that you can cut it and tie into that sense of you're actually part of a business. And I also like the idea of the search for items that may have bad sides to them. Like, you've got to find this thing, but it's cursed. But of course, Acquisitions Inc. doesn't care if you get cursed or irradiated or whatever by a magic item that you recover. They just want the item.
Yeah.
I like the fact that there is a coldness, a cold sense of we don't really care about you. We care about what you produce kind of culture that's kind of fun to play with. But I think the most important thing is the humor. You got to find ways to be silly or introduce silly things. The keg robot is a good example, and it's statted up in the book. It's a robot that carries beer.
Yeah.
And it's a little golem that carries beer. I think that's the kind of thing that when you think of Ack Inc., people resonate with the most, are these sort of quirky, I don't want to say quite anachronistic, but close to anachronistic kinds of things that show up.
Because it is close to anachronism, because you think of the business is that operate in, say, like a Waterdeep or something like that. They have warehouses. They have like a little bit of the corporate structure that we have going on, but this just heightens it.
Yeah, exactly. One of the games that we did was about corporate security.
Yeah.
When they were in, basically the whole game took place in the Acquisitions Inc. headquarters in Baldur's Gate, and we created the headquarters as this sort of very interesting stronghold where the chambers all moved around and shifted form. And I just thought that would be something that Jerry would like and would fit with the way Omen thinks as a defense precaution. But basically testing the security system of corporate headquarters was something that I thought would be cool, just based on Wizard experience of seeing how we handle our security here.
Yeah, as well as...
and by the way, the rooms in this building do actually move around. You probably don't know that.
In the Wizards of the Coast.
Yeah.
But yeah, of course.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, this room changes all the time. That's why we're in different positions.
This was
now.
on the 4th floor yesterday.
I was looking for it. I thought it was gone down
now it's
there.
on the 3rd floor.
Yeah, right. But there's something that because what's really interesting is it is a little bit anachronism, but it's a way to bring it to D&D tropes. So like traps and magical traps that don't really make physical sense.
Yes.
Make perfect sense in this heightened feeling of a building that's built up with all this security.
Right. Yes. And some of the acquisition stories that we told on stage were also just driven by what was happening in the world at the time. The fact that Pacific Rim came out the week before we did the episode with the giant Hallister kaiju that they were stomping around in was not accidental.
It just kind of happened.
It just kind of happened. That happens a lot. Now, there have been things that I've wanted to put in, or actually ideas that were seeded but never paid off. One of the questions I get asked a lot has to do with early on in one of the first ones we did, the characters stopped by a place in Narath called the 5 Leagues House. And there was a mysterious figure, a silhouetted person on the roof of the building watching them, which they ignored, and then went off and did their adventure. And a lot of people have asked, who the fuck was that character? Like, what was that all about? That was never paid. Like, who is that? I get asked that question more than any other.
Okay, who was that? Can you reveal it now?
I will reveal it now because almost assuredly not going to show up because I couldn't figure out a way to shoehorn it back in.
Nice.
It's future Jim come back to kill past Jim.
Oh.
But when he was on the roof planning to attack past Jim, he was struck by how beautiful past Jim was and couldn't bring himself to actually pull the trigger.
Got it. All right. So that's amazing.
So they were going to meet at some point future Jim.
I love that.
Now, what's interesting is ultimately, I decided to spin that differently.
With a clone.
With a clone.
Right.
Because we were doing Tomb of Annihilation, and it occurred to me that Omen's a smart guy. If he knows the death curse is on and his employees won't come back when they die, he'll have them cloned.
Yeah.
So he'll just replace them with a new one.
Yeah.
And that's how the Jim Dark Magic clone came to be. And that won't come to bite them in the ass, I'm sure.
No, never, not
Right.
at all.
Yeah.
And something, this is another tenet that we should get out there before we wrap this up is that, you mentioned it with Pacific Rim, this kind of future thing. It's something that is a trope that's used in a lot of movies and comic books. One of my favorite bits that you incorporated were the two gargoyles in the Out of the Abyss campaign,
yes.
which were very much
Staldorf and Wattler.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The Muppets,
The riff on the cranky old Muppet guys who put down everybody.
Waldorf and Statler,
Yeah, exactly.
which is another tenet of this, which is don't be afraid to insert pop culture references into your D&D game.
Right. Yes, because anybody who's watched a live Acquisitions Inc. games knows that, meta speaking, the guys are throwing around pop culture references all the time.
Right.
So I embed them in the story because it's just an echo of what they're doing at the table.
Yeah. And again, that's another just different flavor of D&D kind of stuff in there. I mean, everybody does that in their home game to a certain extent anyway, but it is a way to heighten and make sure it played up for laughs.
Yes. For those who don't know the lore about the Jim Dark Magic clone, after Omen had it created, he had it stashed aboard the Acquisitions Inc. battle balloon, which is their primary way of getting around in the world.
Which used to be between my cubicle and Trevor Kidd's
and now
cubicle.
now is sitting at home with me for now, where it won't get broken accidentally.
You lovely hug it
Yes,
every once in a while.
Right. But in my live stream game, Bag of Nails, who is Matt Lillard's Tabaxi character, stole the battle balloon with the clone aboard, not realizing it was aboard.
Yes.
Then released the clone. Then the clone came back, and then the clone went. We're not sure. We're not sure where the clone is. To be determined. Oh no, we do know what happened to the clone. It came back, and then Jerry, kind soul that he is, playing Omen, basically was confronted by a devil who told him he had to give up a soul, and he basically gave up the clone's soul to get rid of the clone and hide the evidence
that he had done anything like this.
Yes, but then word of the clones has since gotten out, much to his company's
I
chagrin.
love that movie, Word of the Clones.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you for this stroll down some of the lore behind Acquisitions Incorporated. There is, of course, a lot more. It's also a hard title to say quickly. Acquisitions Incorporated. I keep slurring over it, so I apologize for that. But how can people get in touch with you, Chris, to ask you any more questions about the earlier sessions of Ac Inc.?
I am on Twitter at Chris Perkins DND.
Excellent. Well, that has been this Lore You Should Know. We'll be back with some more next week.
Excellent.
Awesome. Good stuff. We are going to do one more. We got 25 minutes before Benwin Bronzebottom himself is going to kick us off this channel.
Ooh.
Oh, there's no
No
Benwin
Benwin.
today. Oh, great.
Okay.
So we can go on forever and ever.
Well, I have to walk my dog, so it can't go forever and
No,
ever.
you're locked in here because this room I think is now inaccessible.
I can break out.
I could do anything. I am the Lizard King. All right, so
So we're going to jump to the Strange Fiends.
Strange Fiends. I
Yeah.
like that as a rapper.
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool.